Welcome to my channel. Beneath the gentle hush of summer days, there was a little shed, weathered by time and softened by the years. Its wooden walls carried the fragrance of dust and pine, and its roof groaned softly with every passing breeze. It was not grand, not even particularly pretty, but it held something far more precious than appearances could ever promise. That shed was a keeper of secrets, a safe place for two young hearts who once believed love could bloom in even the smallest of corners. There, tucked away in its quiet shelter, lay forgotten letters, folded neatly yet worn from hands that trembled when they were written. Those letters carried words that were never meant for the world to see, only for the one who had stolen glances in the dimming light and smiled when no one else noticed. Each word on the page was an echo of longing, written with the kind of honesty that only the young and hopeful can give. They were filled with promises, sweet and unpolished, carrying the scent of innocence and the weight of dreams. The ink may have faded over time, but the emotions pressed into those words remain alive, locked into the very wood of the shed itself, as though the walls had absorbed every sigh, every heartbeat, every whispered wish. When they sat together inside that shed, it felt as though the world outside had been hushed into silence. The air was thick with the smell of hay and dust, yet to them it was more fragrant than any garden. She would smile as he unfolded another scrap of paper, words trembling on his lips before they found their home on the page. He would watch her eyes light up as she read them, as though each sentence carried a piece of his soul. Those letters were not merely ink and paper. They were living moments suspended in time, tokens of a love too fragile to speak aloud and too fierce to ever be forgotten. Years have a way of scattering memories, pulling them like leaves across the wind. Life grew busier, louder, filled with obligations that neither of them could ignore. Yet, even as they drifted apart, the shed remained. It stood quietly, as though waiting for them to return, holding onto the secrets they had entrusted to its stillness. And when one steps back into that space, when fingers brush against the faded wood, it is as if time bends, the laughter returns, the stolen glances return, the love, though silent, still breathes. To think that love can linger in such a place is a reminder of how powerful the heart can be. A forgotten shed, with its dust and its shadows, becomes more than wood and nails. It becomes a guardian of the human spirit. Within those letters lies a lesson not just of love, but of language itself. For love teaches us words we never knew we could say. It gives us courage to write what we cannot speak, and it shows us that even the simplest sentence can carry the weight of a lifetime. A single "I miss you," written in trembling script, can hold more meaning than entire volumes of polished prose. And so the shed, humble and unassuming, becomes a classroom of sorts. It teaches us that words are not merely tools, but vessels. They carry emotion, they preserve memory, and they remind us that language, when joined with feeling, becomes eternal. Perhaps that is why the letters, though hidden and forgotten, still feel alive when uncovered. They were not written to impress. They were written to connect, to hold on to something fleeting and make it endure. That is what makes them timeless. So, as we step back from that little shed and let its silence wrap around us, we are reminded that love, in its truest form, does not vanish. It waits tucked into corners of memory, folded into fragile papers, whispered into words that refuse to fade. And when we rediscover it, even after many years, it greets us with the same tenderness as it once did. Because love, once spoken, once written, becomes part of who we are, and no passing time can erase it. It still lives here. There is a certain kind of beauty in a meeting that takes place away from the eyes of the world, where two souls find each other not out in the open, but in the quiet shelter of secrecy. The shed became that place for them, a sanctuary where whispers replaced conversations and dreams unfolded without fear of interruption. It was simple in its form, rough wood and dim corners, yet it carried the weight of something extraordinary. For within those four walls, two hearts met and learned what it meant to be entirely seen, even when the world beyond demanded they remain unseen. They would slip away from the noise of daily life, carrying with them nothing but the hope of a few stolen moments. It was there, beneath the soft flicker of light that broke through the cracks, that they spoke of everything they wished for but dared not say aloud elsewhere. Dreams of the future, painted in words as delicate as silk, filled the space. They spoke of journeys they longed to take, promises of places they had never seen, and a vision of a life where love was not something to be hidden. And though their words were quiet, their meaning was vast, stretching beyond the boundaries of that little shelter. What made those moments so precious was not only what was spoken, but what was felt in the silences between. The gentle way a hand would linger near another, the soft laughter that dissolved into stillness, the kind of silence that felt full instead of empty. Their dreams were not only spoken in sentences, but were carried in the rhythm of their presence together, in the unspoken language that love so effortlessly teaches. The shed became the stage upon which their unvoiced desires found form, where every glance was an expression and every sigh a promise. In such secret meetings there lies a kind of sweetness unmatched by anything grand. It is not the magnificence of a ballroom, nor the splendor of a grand hall that makes the memory eternal, but the intimacy of knowing that their love was theirs alone in that moment, untouched by judgment or expectation. They did not require the world's approval, nor did they long for an audience. What they desired most was each other's company, to share dreams as freely as the air they breathed. As time moved forward, the shed held onto those memories, keeping them safe even when the hearts that once met there could no longer return as easily. The echoes of their voices still seemed to cling to its walls, as though the very wood remembered the hopes whispered against it. And when one steps into that place again, years later, it is as if those moments have been preserved in amber, untouched and waiting to be felt once more. The laughter still lingers, the dreams still hover, and the air still hums with the unbroken rhythm of love that was shared there. There is a lesson to be found in their secrecy, not of shame but of the strength of privacy. For in a world that too often demands love to be explained, justified, or even paraded, they found their courage in quietness. They proved that love does not require applause to be real, nor recognition to be powerful. It thrives in hidden corners, in soft exchanges, in the courage to dream together, even when the world would prefer them apart. That shed was not simply wood and nails. It was the proof that when two hearts meet, they create a world of their own, however small, however fragile. And though time may have carried them away from those moments, what was shared in that space remains unbroken. For dreams, once spoken with love, take root. They stay alive in memory, and they remind us that even the most secret of meetings can hold a power greater than any public declaration. In that quiet shelter their love became eternal, for it was built not on show, but on truth, not on grandeur, but on the simplicity of two hearts daring to dream together. It still beats here. There are promises that slip from the lips so effortlessly, they seem almost lighter than air, and yet they settle into the heart as though they were carved in stone. Beneath the creaking roof of that old shed, where the beams groaned softly with age and the air smelled of dust and memory, such promises were made. They were not loud or grand, not bound in ceremony or witnessed by a crowd, but they were whispered in a way that carried the weight of forever. The world outside might have moved with all its clamor, but in that little space, time slowed just enough to let two young souls believe in the eternity of their words. The roof above them was worn, its planks weathered by rain and softened by years of sun, and yet to them it was as sacred as any chapel. It creaked and sighed with every shift of wind, like an old guardian bearing witness to their vows. Perhaps it was that very sound, the gentle groaning of aged wood, that made their promises feel alive, as though even the roof itself leaned in to listen. They spoke not with practiced eloquence, but with the raw sincerity of hearts that knew little of the world but much of love. Their voices wove through the stillness, carried on breaths both unsteady and certain, and what they said was simple, but it was enough. I'll never forget you. I'll always come back. No matter where life takes us, we'll find each other. Such words might have seemed small to anyone else, the kind of declarations youth makes with the conviction of innocence. But to them they were unshakable truths. Those promises wrapped around them like a warm blanket, protecting them from the uncertainty of the future. And though neither could know what roads lay ahead, both believed that love was strong enough to carry them through, that their whispered vows beneath that creaking roof would endure beyond distance, beyond time itself. What made those promises so extraordinary was not their complexity, but their purity. They were not bargains struck out of need or convenience, nor were they bound by duty. They were simply the outpouring of two hearts that wanted nothing more than to remain joined. Each vow was spoken softly, but it rang louder than thunder in their souls, and in that instant nothing felt impossible. The shed seemed to cradle those moments, gathering each word and tucking it away into its wooden frame. Even years later, when one might step back inside, the air would still feel heavy with those whispered forevers. The silence there was not empty, but alive, as though every promise still hovered just above the ground, waiting to be remembered. The creak of the roof had become a rhythm, a reminder of what had once been said beneath its watchful beams. Life, as it so often does, pulled them onto different paths. The promises, though made with the fiercest conviction, could not always hold against the currents of time and change. And yet, their beauty was not diminished by what followed, for even if the vows could not always be kept in the way they were spoken, the sincerity with which they were made gave them a kind of immortality. They lived on in memory, in the heart's deepest chamber, in the echo of that roof's soft groan when recalled years later. There is something profoundly human in such promises, fragile yet eternal, fleeting yet indelible. They remind us that love speaks most truthfully not in proclamations shouted for all to hear, but in the quiet moments when no one is listening. They remind us that words, even when whispered, can leave marks as permanent as scars, and that sincerity has a strength far greater than circumstance. And so, when one thinks back to that little shed, the picture is clear. Two figures seated close, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with the kind of hope that only love can inspire. The roof above them creaks again, and with every sound it makes, the memory of their forever promises lingers, unbroken, waiting, alive. It still whispers here. Life, with its unrelenting tide, has a way of scattering even the closest of hearts. The young lovers who once met beneath the shed's weathered roof soon found themselves pulled into separate currents, each swept along by duty, responsibility, and the demands of a world too large to be ignored. Promises that had been made in whispers still lingered, but distance, silence, and the passage of time pressed heavily upon them. And yet, though their hands could no longer reach for each other as they once had, the shed remained steadfast, holding on to the love they had entrusted to its quiet shelter. It stood there, unmoving, its walls scarred by seasons of rain and wind, yet somehow more alive for what it carried within. The laughter that had once filled its air seemed to cling like dust in the corners, waiting for anyone who entered to stir it up again. The soft scratches on the wooden beams, the faint marks left behind by restless fingers, all told the story of what had been shared. It was as though the shed had absorbed their love, storing it in its very frame, refusing to let it fade even when the world had forced them apart. The boy, now grown, would sometimes pass by the place on his way through the fields, his eyes catching on the familiar shape in the distance. Though he no longer dared step inside, he carried with him the knowledge that something of himself was still there, preserved in that small space. And the girl, her life unfolding miles away, would often remember the feel of that quiet shelter, the warmth of being seen, the sweetness of being understood. Though years stretched long between them, the shed remained a bridge, reminding them that what they had once held was not lost, but waiting, alive in memory. It is strange how a place can hold more than people ever realize. To others, it was nothing more than a storage shed, a forgotten corner of land filled with dust and shadows. But to them, it was proof that love could outlast distance, that even when hearts are torn apart by circumstance, the moments they shared are not erased. Instead, they are kept alive by the spaces that once sheltered them, by the walls that listened, by the roof that bent low to hear their promises. Time moved forward as it always does. Seasons changed, fields grew and were harvested, storms came and passed. But the shed endured, not untouched but unbroken. Its boards bent further, its colors faded, yet within its silence their love still breathed. Whenever one returned, even for the briefest glance, it was as if no time had passed at all. The memories unfurled easily, tender and vivid, reminding them that love, though interrupted, is never fully extinguished. There is a lesson in such endurance, for we often think of love as something fragile, easily broken when distance or silence comes between. Yet here was proof that love can be more resilient than we imagine. It may shift and change, it may retreat into memory, but it does not vanish. The shed became a vessel of that truth, holding steady when life refused to. It guarded their laughter, their promises, their dreams, until they were ready to remember them again. And so, even as life pulled them apart, there was a comfort in knowing that a part of their love was still alive, untouched by time. The shed became their witness, their safe keeper, their quiet guardian. For love, once given, does not disappear. It lives on in the spaces that sheltered it, in the air that once held their words, in the places that refused to forget. And though they may have walked separate roads, the shed remained, carrying their love as faithfully as the day it was born. It still lives here. Years slipped away, as they always do, carrying with them the rush of living, the weight of responsibilities, the quiet passage of days that often blur into one another. Yet, even as the world grew larger and life became more complicated, the memory of that small shed lingered, tucked deep in the heart where no distance could erase it. And so, when at last there came a moment to return, it was not merely a visit to a place, but a journey back into the very core of what had once been. The shed stood much as it had before, though time had pressed itself upon its frame. The wood was grayer, the roof sagged lower, and vines clung tightly to its sides, as though trying to hold it steady against the years. But it remained, stubborn in its stillness, waiting as if it had been keeping watch all along. To step inside was to awaken something long asleep, a stirring of emotions that words could hardly contain. The air was heavy with dust, but beneath it lay the faint, unshakable fragrance of memory. Each corner spoke without sound. The grooves in the wood seemed to whisper of laughter once shared, of voices lowered to keep their secrets safe. The marks left behind by restless hands were still visible, faint yet undeniable, like traces of a story written on the walls. It was impossible not to feel it, the presence of what had once been, alive and pulsing beneath the quiet surface of the room. And as the stillness wrapped around, emotions rushed forward, fierce and unbidden. There was tenderness, sweet and soft, at the recollection of those first moments of love. There was ache, sharp and undeniable, at the thought of how time had carried them apart. There was even a kind of wonder, a hushed reverence at how something so simple, so fragile, could endure in silence for so long. It was as though the shed itself had been holding its breath, waiting for the moment when hearts would return to remember. To stand there again was to feel the fullness of love in all its forms, the joy of what was shared, the sorrow of what was lost, the gratitude for what remained unbroken. Every detail seemed alive with meaning. The way the light filtered through the cracks, the sound of the roof shifting against the wind, even the faint echo of footsteps on the wooden floor. Each one was a reminder that love, once felt, never truly vanishes. It lingers, patient and quiet, until the day it is invited back into the open. There is a particular kind of power in such returns, for we do not merely see the place as it is, we see it as it was, and as it will always be in memory. The shed was no longer just wood and nails, but a vessel for everything that had once been spoken within it. It carried the weight of promises whispered, the dreams shared, the laughter that had filled its silence. And now, years later, it offered those emotions back again, fresh and raw, as though no time at all had passed. The heart, in such moments, does not distinguish between past and present. It simply feels. And in that shed, the heart was reminded of all it once knew. That love, however hidden, however interrupted, remains alive when it is cherished. To return was to find that nothing had been truly lost, only waiting, preserved in the quiet strength of memory. So there, beneath the same sagging roof, with the same walls leaning close, the truth was undeniable. Time had taken much, but it had not taken everything. What was felt there once was still alive, still trembling in the air, still waiting to be acknowledged. And in that recognition came a profound peace, the kind that comes from knowing love, once given, never truly disappears. It still waits here. There are moments in life when words seem too small, when language, however rich, struggles to carry the weight of what the heart feels. Love and memory together hold a kind of power that stretches far beyond what speech can express. They live in gestures, in silences, in the look of an eye or the touch of a hand. And yet they also find ways to shape our words, to teach us how to say more than we ever thought possible. The little shed, with its quiet stillness and its store of secrets, became a place where love and memory did not simply exist. They became teachers, guiding two young souls toward an understanding of expression deeper than language itself. Every letter once written, there was not just ink on a page, but a confession of the heart, spilling out truths too fragile to be spoken aloud. Love has a way of doing that. It gives courage to clumsy words, turns the ordinary into the eternal, and reveals that even the simplest sentences, "I miss you," "I'm here," "I will return," can carry the fullness of eternity when spoken with sincerity. Memory, in turn, preserved those words, held them tight against time's erosion, and gave them a life far longer than the breath that first uttered them. Even now, when the shed is entered years later, the air feels thick with those unsaid words. Not because they were never voiced, but because their meaning still lingers, stitched into the silence. Love, at its purest, communicates without speaking, and memory keeps that communication alive long after the moment has passed. The creak of the roof, the smell of wood and dust, the faint trail of sunlight sneaking through a crack, all of it becomes part of a language beyond grammar, one that the heart understands without translation. What those two souls learned there was not just how to love, but how to give shape to love in words, gestures, and silences. It was as if love itself had taken their hands and guided them, showing that expression need not be polished to be powerful. A whispered promise, though trembling, could hold more weight than a speech rehearsed 100 times. A memory, recalled in stillness, could speak louder than any declaration shouted to the world. And in those lessons, language became something more than vocabulary and grammar. It became a vessel carrying truths the heart alone could not contain. There is something universal in this. We have all known moments when words fail us, when a glance across a room says more than 1,000 letters, when the brush of a hand lingers longer in memory than any carefully chosen phrase. Love and memory are fluent in a language without borders, and once we experience it, we are never quite the same. We begin to understand that our words matter not because they are perfect, but because they are filled with feeling. We learn that silence can be eloquent, that a pause can speak as strongly as a sentence, that sometimes the heart writes more clearly than the pen ever could. The shed became their classroom, but it also became a mirror, reflecting back to them the truth that what is most deeply felt is never lost. The love that bloomed there, though shaped by secrecy and shadowed by the passage of years, found its permanence not in the pages of those letters alone, but in the way it taught them to speak with their whole beings. Memory ensured that those lessons would endure, long after the ink had faded and the voices had grown silent. And so, when we think of that place, when we recall the promises whispered there and the dreams exchanged, we realize the true gift it gave. It was not only the shelter of their love, nor only the witness of their vows. It was the reminder that love and memory, entwined, teach us to speak in ways that words alone can never capture. They teach us that language is not merely learned in books or classrooms, but in the tender act of feeling, remembering, and daring to share what lies deepest in the heart. It still speaks here. Thank you for sharing this journey of love, memory, and words that last forever. If these moments touched your heart, let them stay alive by keeping them close. Stories like these remind us that love never fades, even when time moves on. So if you felt the power of this story, give it a like to show your support. And don't forget to subscribe for more timeless English stories that speak beyond language.